The dream home. Jonas had always been a man with big dreams. From a young age, he had worked hard, climbing his way up from a struggling entrepreneur to a successful businessman. But no matter how much he achieved, one goal remained just out of reach: owning a home in Solanga Hills, the most luxurious neighborhood in the city. For years, he had driven past its gated communities, towering mansions, and tree-lined streets, promising himself that one day, he would live there. But the prices were astronomical, rising higher every year, and no matter how much he saved, Solanga Hills always seemed beyond his grasp. Then, one evening, everything changed. Jonas was sitting in his small office, scrolling through real estate listings, when his eyes caught something unbelievable. A mansion, a grand, 5-bedroom estate, was listed at a price that seemed too good to be true. It was at least 70% lower than what similar houses in the area were worth. At first, he assumed it was a mistake. Perhaps a scam. Or maybe the house was in terrible condition. But after checking and rechecking the details, everything seemed legitimate. Excitement surged through him. This was his chance. He called the real estate agent immediately. "Yes, sir," the agent said over the phone, his voice smooth but strangely hesitant. "The house is real, and the price is final. It's a quick sale property. If you're interested, we can arrange a visit tomorrow." Jonas didn't need to think twice. "I'll take it," he said, without hesitation. A too-good-to-be-true deal. The next day, Jonas and his wife, Aisha, arrived at the property. The mansion was massive, far bigger than they had expected. Though the white paint was faded and the garden overgrown, the structure itself was solid and beautiful. Aisha, a woman of both grace and caution, looked at Jonas with raised eyebrows. "It's nice," she said slowly. "But why is it so cheap?" Jonas shrugged. "Maybe the owner just wants to sell quickly. Maybe it needs repairs." Aisha glanced at the tall, narrow windows, which seemed almost too dark, as though they were hiding something. "I don't know, Jonas, something doesn't feel right." But Jonas wasn't listening. He was already imagining their future here, their children running through the spacious hallways, their family hosting lavish dinner parties, and, most importantly, the respect that came with living in Solanga Hills. Ignoring Aisha's hesitation, he turned to the agent. "I'll sign the papers today. A new beginning." Within a week, the mansion was theirs. On move-in day, Jonas, Aisha, and their 2 children, Malik, 10, and Zoe, 6, pulled into the long, gravel driveway. The kids were ecstatic. "This place is huge," Malik exclaimed, pressing his face against the car window. "Do we have a swimming pool?" Zoe asked excitedly. Jonas laughed. "Not yet. But we can build one." As they stepped out of the car, a cold wind brushed past them, even though the sun was shining brightly. Aisha shivered, rubbing her arms. "Did you feel that?" she whispered. Jonas barely noticed. He was too busy admiring his dream home, ignoring the subtle, uneasy feeling creeping into the back of his mind. They spent the entire day unpacking, arranging furniture, and cleaning. The house had clearly been empty for a long time, with layers of dust coating the shelves and cobwebs dripping over the chandeliers. But by evening, the mansion was starting to feel like home. A cold welcome. As the sun set, Aisha decided to introduce herself to the neighbors. She knocked on a few doors, smiling warmly. But the reactions were strange. Most barely opened their doors, peeking out with nervous eyes before muttering short greetings and shutting the doors quickly. One elderly woman, standing at the corner of the street, shook her head silently as she watched Aisha walk back toward the house. "That was odd," Aisha told Jonas. "Nobody wants to talk to us. It's like they're afraid of something." Jonas shrugged, brushing it off. "They're probably just snobs." "We're new here, they'll warm up to us eventually." But Aisha wasn't so sure. Whispers in the dark. That night, as they settled into bed, Aisha felt restless. The house was too quiet. At exactly midnight, she woke up to a faint sound. A whisper. Aisha sat up, heart pounding. It was coming from the hallway. She nudged Jonas, but he was fast asleep. Taking a deep breath, she slowly got up, tiptoeing toward the door. As soon as she stepped into the hallway, the whispering stopped. She looked left, then right. Nothing. Just empty darkness stretching down the long corridor. Shaking her head, she convinced herself it was just her imagination. She was about to turn back when she noticed something odd. The hallway led to a single, large door at the far end, one she hadn't noticed earlier. It was different from the others, made of solid iron, with strange carvings etched into the surface. A sudden chill ran down her spine. Something about that door felt wrong. Swallowing hard, she turned back to bed, forcing herself to ignore it. But as she walked away, she swore she heard a faint sound. A soft knock from behind the iron door. Aisha froze. Then, silence. It's just an old house. Over the next few days, Malik and Zay began noticing strange things too. Malik told his mother that he had seen a dark shadow moving in the corner of his room, but when he looked again, it was gone. Zay said she heard someone whispering her name while she was playing alone. At first, Jonas laughed it off. "It's just an old house," he told them. "You're all just getting used to it." But Aisha wasn't convinced. And as the days passed, the house began to feel colder, darker, and more unsettling. One night, as Jonas walked past the iron door, he thought he heard something faint. A whisper. So soft it could have been the wind. But as he turned away, the whispering stopped abruptly, as if it had been listening to him too. For the first time since moving in, Jonas felt a flicker of fear. But he pushed it down, refusing to believe anything was wrong. After all, this was his dream home. And he wasn't about to let anything ruin it. A community that watches. Unwelcome in Solanga Hills. The next morning, Aisha decided to try again with the neighbors. Perhaps they had just been shy at first, or maybe they needed time to warm up to their new presence. She baked a batch of sweet plantain bread, wrapped it neatly in foil, and walked over to the house next door. She knocked. Silence. She knocked again. The door creaked open just an inch, revealing a pair of cautious eyes. Aisha smiled warmly. "Hello, I'm Aisha. My family and I just moved into the house next door. I wanted to say hello and..." The door slammed shut. Aisha took a step back, her heart sinking. Shaking off the rejection, she tried the house across the street. A tall, thin woman opened the door but didn't step outside. Her gaze flickered toward Aisha's house before settling on Aisha with a look of concern. "You should leave," the woman whispered. Aisha's stomach tightened. "Excuse me." The woman's expression hardened. "That house, it's not meant for the living." Before Aisha could respond, the woman shut the door. "The children are avoided." Later that day, Malik and Zay went outside to play. The neighborhood was beautiful, lined with massive mansions, neatly trimmed hedges, and clean, quiet streets. Malik spotted a group of boys playing soccer nearby and ran toward them. "Hey! Can we join?" he asked excitedly. The boys froze, their eyes darting toward the house behind Malik. Without a word, they grabbed their ball and ran inside, slamming the gate behind them. Malik frowned. "They didn't even say no," he muttered. Zay, standing beside him, shivered. "Maybe they don't like us." Before Malik could respond, a low growl echoed from behind them. They turned and saw a large black dog from one of the neighbors' homes. The dog's fur bristled, and it let out a snarling bark, staring directly at the children. But instead of charging forward, the dog backed away, whimpering as it bolted in the opposite direction. Malik and Zay exchanged a look. Even the dogs didn't want to come near their house. The whispers grew louder. That night, the whispers returned. Zay woke up to a soft, distant voice calling her name. Zay. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding. Across the room, Malik was still fast asleep. Zay. The voice was coming from the hallway. Swallowing hard, she climbed out of bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit. As she peeked out of her room, her breath hitched in her throat. At the end of the dark hallway stood a woman dressed in white. Her long, tangled hair hung over her shoulders, and her face was pale and hollow. Zoe's tiny hands trembled as she stepped back, her throat dry. The woman tilted her head slightly, then raised a hand and pointed toward the iron door at the far end of the hallway. Zoe gasped and slammed her bedroom door shut, diving under her covers. The whispers faded. But for the rest of the night, she did not sleep. Jonah's denial. Aisha noticed the change in her children. Zoe, usually full of energy, was now quiet and withdrawn. Malik barely spoke about playing outside anymore. Even Aisha felt uneasy, catching movement from the corner of her eye, only to turn and find nothing there. One evening, she sat Jonas down. Jonas, something is wrong with this house. Jonas sighed, already frustrated. Not this again. I'm serious, Aisha said. The neighbors are terrified of us. The kids won't play outside. And last night, Zay. She's 6, Aisha, Jonas interrupted. She probably had a bad dream. Aisha's fist clenched. You're ignoring the signs, she snapped. We need to find out what happened here before we moved in. Jonas shook his head. I'm not going to let paranoia ruin this for us. I've worked too hard for this home. With that, he grabbed the paintbrush and went back to his renovations. The banging on the iron door. That night, the house grew cold. Jonas tossed in his sleep, but Aisha was wide awake. Then, at exactly midnight, a loud bang shattered the silence. It came from the iron door. Aisha sat up instantly, her pulse racing. Bang! 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 Jonas groggily opened his eyes. What was that? He muttered. Aisha turned to him, eyes wide. The iron door, someone's inside. Jonas froze. Another bang echoed down the hallway, followed by a low, eerie whisper. Jonas swung his legs off the bed and grabbed his phone. He quickly dialed the real estate agent. The phone rang twice before the agent picked up. Mr. Jonas, the agent's voice was tense. There's something behind the iron door, Jonas said, his voice sharp. And I need answers. The agent was silent for too long. I'll look into it, he finally muttered. Just don't open the door. Then he hung up. Jonas stared at his phone, his blood running cold. Why did the agent sound so afraid? The crying woman. That night, Aisha finally fell asleep, but her dreams were anything but peaceful. She found herself standing in their hallway, facing the iron door. From inside, she heard sobbing. A woman was weeping, her voice full of sorrow and pain. Aisha's heart ached. Who are you? She whispered. The crying suddenly stopped. The door creaked open just an inch, and a figure stepped forward. Aisha gasped in horror. The woman's face was pale and hollow, her eyes dark, empty voids. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Leave before it's too late." A cold hand gripped Aisha's wrist. She screamed and jerked awake, gasping for air. Her pulse pounded, her body soaked in sweat. Jonas was still sleeping beside her. Aisha sat there, clutching her chest, as the words echoed in her mind. Leave before it's too late. She knew, deep in her heart. They weren't alone in this house, the warnings and the key. The old man's warning. Jonas had never been the type to believe in superstitions or ghost stories, but the events of the past few weeks had shaken him. The cold stares of the neighbors, the unsettling whispers, the mysterious banging on the iron door, none of it made sense. Aisha had grown more anxious by the day, and even he had started to feel an unexplainable weight pressing on his chest every time he walked through the house. So, when a knock came at the door one evening, Jonas was relieved for the distraction. Standing outside was an old man with deep wrinkles, dark weathered skin, and eyes that held the weight of many years. "Are you the new owner?" the man asked in a rough voice. Jonas hesitated, then nodded. "I'm Mr. Mossy. I've lived here since I was a child." He gestured toward the street behind him. "I knew the families who lived in your house before you. And the ones before them." Jonas frowned. "And?" Mr. Mossy stared at him, his gaze heavy. "They all met terrible fates." A chill ran down Jonas' spine. Aisha stepped beside him, gripping his arm. "What do you mean?" Mr. Mossy sighed and shook his head. "The mansion you live in, it was never meant to be a home. You need to leave before it's too late." Jonas scoffed. "Look, I've had enough of these ridiculous rumors. If you're here to scare us, it's not going to work." "I'm not here to scare you," Mr. Mossy said, his tone serious. "I'm here to warn you." Aisha's voice was trembling now. "Warn us about what?" The old man hesitated before finally speaking. "The first owner of that house, Chief Obesai, was a man of great power, but not the kind you want to be associated with. He made a pact, one that demanded blood in return for wealth. Many people went missing in that house, and when he finally died, his spirit never left." Jonas let out an exhausted breath. "This is ridiculous. I don't believe in ghosts." Mr. Mossy shook his head. "Belief has nothing to do with it. The spirits in that house are real and they are angry." He turned to Aisha. "Has anything strange been happening since you moved in?" Aisha's lips parted, but she said nothing. She didn't have to. The fear in her eyes was enough. Strange sleepwalking. That night, Jonas tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Mr. Mossy's words haunted him, no matter how hard he tried to dismiss them. Then, in the middle of the night, he heard a noise. A door creaking open. Jonas shot up in bed. Aisha stood beside him. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Aisha nodded. Jonas got up and stepped out into the hallway, his heart pounding. His breath caught in his throat. Malik was standing outside near the iron door, barefoot and staring at it blankly. "Malik," Jonas whispered, approaching his son cautiously. Malik didn't respond. Jonas reached out, touching his shoulder. Malik suddenly gasped awake, his eyes wide with terror. "Dad," he cried, throwing himself into Jonas' arms. Jonas knelt down, gripping Malik's trembling shoulders. "What are you doing out here?" Malik shook his head violently. I don't know. I just woke up here." Aisha's voice shouted from upstairs. "Jonas!" Jonas scooped up Malik and ran back inside. Aisha stood at the top of the stairs, her face pale. She pointed at something on the steps. Zay was lying there, curled up, fast asleep. Jonas rushed to pick her up. She felt ice cold. Aisha's voice shook. "Jonas, she wasn't there when we went to bed." Neither of them said what they were both thinking. Something was moving their children while they slept. A bitter argument. The next morning, Aisha had enough. "I don't care what you say, Jonas. We are leaving." Jonas rubbed his temples, exhausted. Aisha, we've been through this. No, you've been through this, she snapped. I've been watching our children suffer while you pretend everything is fine. Jonas' patience snapped. I didn't work my whole life to live in Solanga Hills just to run away like cowards because of some silly ghost stories. This is not just some story, Jonas. Aisha yelled. How many more signs do you need before you admit that something is wrong? Malik was outside. Zeli was on the stairs. Jonas took a deep breath, clenching his fist. I will fix this. I will find out what's behind that damn iron door. Aisha stared at him, heartbroken. She knew, deep down, he was already lost. The rusted key. That afternoon, Jonas called the real estate agent again. Listen, I need the key to that iron door. Now. The agent was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed. Meet me outside your house. 30 minutes later, Jonas stepped out onto the driveway. The real estate agent was there, his expression grim. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an old, rusted key. I was told never to give this to anyone, he murmured. But, maybe you need it. Jonas took the key, his hand shaking slightly. The agent turned away quickly. Whatever you find in there, you're on your own. And with that, he left. Jonas looked at the key, then back at the house. For the first time, doubt crept into his mind. The iron door opens. That night, after Aisha and the kids had gone to bed, Jonas stood in front of the iron door. His hands were sweating as he gripped the key. He inserted it into the ancient keyhole. With a deep breath, he turned it. The lock clicked. The door creaked open, revealing a hidden chamber. Jonas stepped inside, his breath catching in his throat. The walls were covered in faded symbols, their meanings unknown. Red candles, melted and long extinguished, littered the floor. Dark stains marred the stone walls. And at the center of the room, an old, tattered diary sat on a table. Jonas approached it slowly. As he reached out to touch it, the pages fluttered open on their own. Then, a whisper filled the room. A voice not of this world. Jonas froze. The diary's pages were whispering to him, the diary of the dead. The whispers of the past. Jonas' hands trembled as he reached for the old diary. The book was covered in faded leather, its edges worn and cracked with age. As soon as he touched it, a sudden chill spread through his body, as if an invisible force had wrapped around him. The pages fluttered open on their own, revealing dark ink that had somehow remained bold and clear despite the passage of time. The whispers in the room grew louder, swirling around him like a storm. Then, his eyes caught the name Naima scrawled at the top of the first page. He swallowed hard and began to read. Naima's story. My name is Naima. I was once a maid in this house, but now, I am nothing more than a lost soul. I was not the first. Nor will I be the last. This house belongs to Chief Obesai, a man of unspeakable power and cruelty. People believe he built his wealth through business and trade, but that is a lie. His true fortune was forged in blood and darkness. Every full moon, I heard the screams from beneath the house, desperate cries that faded into silence before the night was over. And then, the next day, the chief's wealth seemed to grow, as if the house itself rewarded him. The walls absorbed their pain. The floors drank their blood. When I discovered the truth, it was already too late. He took my family. My husband. My son. We were sacrificed to keep the house alive. But the spirits here are not at rest. We are trapped. And now, you are, too. Jonas snapped the book shut, his pulse racing. His breath came in short, ragged gasps as the room seemed to darken around him. The whispers turned into muffled cries, growing more desperate. For the first time since moving in, Jonas felt true, undeniable terror. The children are next. Jonas rushed out of the chamber, slamming the iron door shut behind him. His hands were shaking as he locked it again. He sprinted up the stairs, bursting into the bedroom where Aisha was sitting, wide awake. "What's wrong?" she asked, her face pale with worry. Jonas didn't know how to explain it. The truth was too horrifying. But before he could speak, a chilling sound echoed through the house. A whisper. Then a laugh. Jonas and Aisha turned toward the bedroom door. The air grew thick and suffocating as they stepped out into the hallway. Their breath caught in their throats. Malik was standing at the edge of the upstairs balcony, his arms outstretched, his small body swaying dangerously close to falling over. But that wasn't what made Aisha scream. Malik's lips were moving. But the words he spoke were not his own. It was a language they had never heard before, one that sounded ancient and filled with pain. Jonas bolted toward his son. "Malik," he shouted. "Step back." Malik didn't respond. Jonas grabbed his son's shoulders and shook him hard. Malik gasped, his eyes snapping into focus, as if waking from a deep sleep. "Dad," his voice quivered. Jonas pulled him away from the railing, hugging him tightly. Then, Aisha let out a strangled cry. Jonas spun around. Zoe was standing in the hallway, but it wasn't her voice that came from her lips. The voice was older, broken, filled with sorrow. It was Naima. "Please, help us, break the curse, before they take your children, too." Then, Zoe screamed. Her tiny body convulsed as if something was trying to pull her away from this world. The house began to shake violently. The walls groaned, the air thick with whispers and cries. Jonas grabbed Zoe and scooped Malik into his arms. "Aisha, run," he shouted. The family bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping over the shaking floorboards. The front door wouldn't open. The shadows on the walls began to move, reaching toward them. Then, bang! The iron door at the end of the hall burst open, revealing the dark chamber once again. A loud inhuman wail filled the house. Aisha screamed. Jonas turned toward her and saw something that made his blood run cold. A dark figure was emerging from the chamber. It was tall, its body wrapped in black mist, with glowing red eyes that burned like fire. And it was coming for them. Jonas didn't think. He grabbed Aisha's hand, kicked open a window, and jumped through it with his family. They hit the ground hard, rolling onto the grass. Behind them, the house shook violently, as if something was furious that they had escaped. Jonas looked up. The front door slammed shut on its own. And then, silence. Only the whispering wind remained. Aisha clutched her children, tears streaming down her face. "We are never going back inside that house," she whispered. Jonas, still staring at the dark windows, could only nod. Because he knew the truth now. The house was alive. And it wanted blood. The ritual of blood. Desperate for answers. Jonas knew they had no time to waste. His family had barely escaped the house, but the curse still clung to them. He could feel it in the cold sweat on Malik's forehead, in the distant look in Zoe's eyes. Whatever had tried to take them wasn't done yet. He rushed to Mr. Mosey's house, pounding on the door. It swung open before he could knock a second time. The old man stood there, his wrinkled face grim, as if he had been expecting Jonas all along. "You saw it, didn't you?" Mr. Mosey said quietly. Jonas nodded, breathless. "Tell me how to stop this." Mr. Mosey sighed, then stepped aside. "Come in. The only way to end it." The room was dimly lit by a single oil lamp, casting long shadows across the walls. Mr. Mosey sat across from Jonas and placed a small clay bowl between them. You have until midnight, he said. If you don't finish the ritual by then, the spirits will take your children forever. Jonah's stomach twisted. He had felt it, that presence trying to claim Malik and Zoe, trying to pull them into something dark and endless. What do I have to do? Jonas asked, his voice raw. Mr. Mosi pulled out Naima's diary and flipped to the final page. You must perform a cleansing ritual, one that will sever the curse that binds the spirits to the house, he explained. Jonas listened intently. You'll need Naima's words, Mr. Mosi continued. But that won't be enough. There is still something inside the house that anchors the spirits there. The ritual won't work unless you find it and destroy it. Jonah's breath hitched. What is it? Mr. Mosi's deep-set eyes locked onto his. Chief Obesai's cursed necklace. The mirror's message. Jonas returned to Aisha and the children, who were huddled together in the car, too afraid to move. He explained what Mr. Mosi had told him. We have to go back, Jonas said. Aisha's face palmed with disbelief. No. Jonas, no. We barely escaped. You saw what that thing? If we don't break the curse tonight, Jonas cut her off, Malik and Zoe won't be safe. Ever. Aisha's eyes welled with fear and frustration, but she knew he was right. Then, Aisha suddenly froze. Jonas followed her gaze. She was staring at the side mirror of the car. Jonas, she whispered. Jonas turned toward the mirror and his blood ran cold. Naima's spirit was in the reflection. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, but she wasn't looking at them. She was pointing toward the house. No. Not just the house. The basement. The buried box. The moment they stepped inside, the house seemed to react. The air grew heavy, the shadows lengthened unnaturally, and a foul, decaying stench filled the halls. Jonas gripped the diary tightly. Where's the basement? He asked. Aisha led him toward the kitchen, where a small door led down into darkness. The wooden steps creaked beneath their weight as they descended. At the bottom, dust swirled in the air, illuminated by a flickering overhead light. Then, Malik suddenly pointed at the floor. There, he whispered. Jonas knelt down and ran his hands over the cold, cracked cement. It felt loose. He grabbed a metal rod nearby and began chipping away at the ground. Aisha and the children watched in tense silence. Then, with a dull thud, the rod struck something solid. Jonas' breath hitched. He dug frantically until a wooden box appeared, buried just beneath the surface. Aisha gasped. Jonas hesitated. Then he opened it. Inside, nestled in rotting cloth, was a necklace. The chain was blackened with age, and the pendant was a deep, unnatural red, pulsing as if it were alive. The spirit's attack. As soon as Jonas touched the necklace, the house erupted. The walls groaned, as if they were alive, and a loud, inhuman wail filled the air. A gust of cold wind rushed through the basement, knocking Malik and Zoe to the ground. The overhead light exploded, plunging them into darkness. Then, objects flew off the shelves, smashing against the walls. Blood began to seep from the cracks in the floor, bubbling up like something trapped beneath. Aisha screamed as a shadowy hand emerged from the wall, reaching for Zoe. Jonas yanked the necklace out of the box and clutched the diary to his chest. It was now or never. The ritual begins. Jonas flipped to the final page of Naima's diary. The words were glowing faintly, as if urging him to read them. He grabbed Aisha's hand, and she pulled Malik and Zoe close. Then, together, they began to chant. Through blood you bound them, through fire we free them. No longer shall the spirit suffer, no longer shall the curse remain. Break the chains, let them go, return them to the light. The house shook violently. The walls screamed. Dark figures crawled from the shadows, their mouths wide with agony as they reached toward the necklace. Jonas tightened his grip on it. Then, with all his strength, he threw it into the fire. The necklace let out a piercing wail, as if it were alive and in pain. The spirits howled, twisting in the air as their forms began to dissolve. The house shuddered one last time. Then collapsed into absolute silence. The curse is broken. Jonas, Aisha, and the children stayed huddled together for several minutes, breathing heavily in the quiet aftermath. Then, Malik spoke. "Dad," he pointed toward the basement door. Jonas turned. Naima stood there. But this time, she was smiling. Her face was calm, peaceful, her hollow eyes now filled with light. She nodded once, then faded away, taking the last of the darkness with her. Jonas let out a deep, shaky breath. The curse was broken. And they were finally free. The final battle. The spirits rise. The moment the cursed necklace was destroyed, the house screamed. A chilling, inhuman wail echoed through the walls as shadows erupted from the ground, twisting and writhing in agony. Jonas shielded his family, his heart pounding as the spirits of the trapped victims began to emerge. Dozens of tormented souls, their faces twisted in pain and sorrow, crawled from the walls, the floors, the very air around them. But they were not attacking. They were freeing themselves. Aisha clutched Malik and Zoe tightly. "Jonas, look." The spirits, men, women, children, turned their hollow eyes toward him, their whispers grateful. And then, a deafening roar shattered the moment. The air turned ice cold. A dark figure rose from the center of the room, his towering form surrounded by black flames. Jonas stiffened. It was him. Chief Obesai. Obesai's wrath. The demonic spirit loomed over them, his eyes burning red, his face twisted with fury. "You fools," his voice boomed like a thunderclap. A force ripped through the house, sending Jonas and Aisha stumbling backward. The spirits of the victims screamed in terror, shrinking away as Obesai's dark power pulled them back toward him. "You think you can undo my work?" Obesai snarled, his voice laced with hatred. "This house is mine. Their souls belong to me." The shadows coiled around his arms, forming dark tendrils that lashed out toward the family. Jonas grabbed a broken wooden beam, standing his ground. "You don't own them anymore," he growled. "And you don't own us." Obesai let out a horrific laugh. "Then you will join them." With a flick of his hand, the ground cracked open, revealing a swirling black void, a gateway to the spirit realm. A powerful force yanked at them, pulling Malik and Zoe toward the dark abyss. Malik screamed. "Dad!" Jonas lunged forward, grabbing his son's wrist. Aisha grabbed Zoe, pulling with all her strength as the force tried to consume them. But Obesai's power was too strong. Jonas felt his grip slipping. If he didn't do something now, he would lose his children forever. Jonas' sacrifice. Jonas locked eyes with Aisha. He saw the terror in her face, the pleading in her eyes. But he knew what he had to do. With a deep breath, he let go of Malik's hand and threw himself into the void. "Jonas!" Aisha screamed. Jonas grabbed Obesai as he fell, his arms locking around the spirit's shadowed form. Obesai let out a furious shriek, clawing at Jonas, but Jonas held tight. "If you're going to take them," Jonas gritted his teeth, "then you're coming with me." The force dragged them both down, the swirling darkness consuming them. Jonas' last sight was Aisha reaching for him, her eyes full of sorrow. Then, the gateway slammed shut. The house burns. The moment Jonas and Obesai disappeared, the mansion began to collapse. The walls groaned, the floor splintering apart as fire erupted from within. Aisha, still in shock, grabbed Malik and Zay, dragging them toward the front door. They barely made it outside before the entire house exploded into flames. Aisha turned, her chest heaving, as the mansion burned brightly against the night sky. Then, she saw her. Standing at the entrance of the burning house, Naima's spirit appeared one last time. She was smiling. Her hollow eyes now filled with peace. "You are free now," she whispered. Then, like ashes in the wind, she faded into the night. Aisha fell to her knees, sobbing. Jonas was gone. The aftermath. By morning, the mansion was gone. Not just burned. Erased. There was no sign that the house had ever stood there, just a blackened, empty field. The land itself seemed to exhale, as if it had been freed from a terrible weight. Aisha held Malik and Zay close, whispering, "We're leaving." They never looked back. They left Solanga Hills forever. A whisper on the wind. Jonas was never seen again. But on stormy nights, when the wind howled through the trees, a whisper could be heard across the empty land where the house once stood. A whisper that carried a promise. Protect them. The end.